The story will begin with the introduction of a K-pop group called Eclipse. This group consists of 4 young men, namely Hunsu is a drummer, Inhyuk is a guitarist, Dongsu is a bass and the vocalist and lead actor in this drama, Ryu Sanja. At that time the newly debuted Eclipse group will conduct an interview session while promoting their group with one of the radio stations, while in another place a woman is seen lying limp helplessly and this woman is named Imsul. She had an accident that made Imsul paralyzed so that she could not walk anymore, thus making Imsul become demoralized to live life. Back to the Eclipse group who are conducting interviews, they are now asked by the announcer to make random calls to radio listeners who will later be given prizes. Sanja the vocalist is given the opportunity to call in what Sanja calls as Imsul, who is lying limp in the hospital. When Imsul picked up the phone, Sanja immediately asked if Imsul knew about the group Eclipse, but Imsul replied that she didn't know about the group, which made Sanja and his friends quite surprised, because Eclipse is a famous group even though it has only debuted for 2 months, but Imsul didn't care, until when Sanja was about to give Imsul a shoe gift for being one of the lucky listeners, Imsul suddenly got angry and said that she didn't want any gifts and felt that she was the unluckiest person in the world because she was completely paralyzed. Hearing that Sanja also gave advice to Imsul, by saying to keep the spirit of life and not despair, because the people closest to Imsul will be happy if Imsul remains eager to live, it certainly made Imsul, who was initially emotional and depressed because of the bad luck she experienced, to cry in her mother's arms. Since hearing Sanja's words, Imsul immediately idolized Ryu Sanja. It can be seen with so many photos and Sanja accessories in her room, and Imsul seems to have the spirit to return to life, even though now she cannot walk and only uses a wheelchair. On that sunny morning, Imsul prepared to come to the Eclipse group concert. Imsul went with her old high school friend named Hunju. Their Hunju gave a gift to Imsul in the form of a photo album of Sanja in high school. It turned out that Sanja went to school across from Imsul's school. Even though they were different schools, Imsul was still happy because she had once been close to her idol. Arriving at the concert venue, Imsul was very enthusiastic waiting for Sanja and his Eclipse group to perform, but soon Imsul got a job interview call from one of the companies. Feeling that there was still time, Imsul came there because the job was very important to her. When she came to the office, Imsul was not accepted by the company, because of Imsul's paralyzed condition, making Imsul feel disappointed, but Imsul tried to be strong because she was sure there were still many jobs out there that were more worthy of her, and now Imsul eagerly returned to the concert venue to watch her idol Sanja. But it turned out that Sanja's concert was already underway. Imsul was in a hurry to try to get into the stadium where Sanja was singing, but unfortunately when Imsul was asked to show a concert ticket by the committee, unfortunately Imsul's ticket fell while riding the bus, which made Imsul unable to enter the stadium. But again Imsul, who is now not easily discouraged and full of enthusiasm, she decided to enjoy the concert by listening to Sanja's melodious voice from outside the stadium. While inside the stadium is shown so many spectators who are hysterical watching Sanja's melodious voice, coupled with his handsome face that makes Sanja an idol for many women including Imsul. But behind the success of Sanja and his Eclipse group, Sanja and his friends are not getting along. Sanja even said that he would quit as the vocalist of the Eclipse group, while Imsul, who was going home after watching the concert, continued to have bad luck when her wheelchair ran out of batteries, which made Imsul unable to leave and just stood cold, hoping that someone would come to help her. Soon someone came to help Imsul and turned out to be Sanja. Her idol romantically shaded Imsul and gave a handkerchief, making Imsul shed tears of happiness because she met Sanja in person. Imsul is very grateful to Sanja for being present in this world, as well as making her excited to live life. Hearing that, Sanja was very touched, but soon Hunju came to pick up Imsul. Sanja then gave his umbrella. Imsul also gave candy to Sanja as a thank you. At home, Imsul still looks very happy because she can meet Sanja in person, and keeps all the gifts from her idol, especially a black watch. Until midnight, Imsul woke up and was surprised to see the news that her idol Sanja had committed suicide. Imsul immediately rushed to the hospital where Sanja was treated, but on the way the watch given by Sanja fell into the river. Imsul tried to pick it up by crawling, but the news of Sanja's suicide spread even faster, making Imsul even more unable to hold back her sadness. Until a strange unexpected event occurred. Suddenly Imsul's watch took her back in time when she was in high school, making Imsul feel astonished and shocked by the incident. Even she thought that this incident was a dream. Imsul, who remembered that in high school her school was close to Sanja, she immediately ran to Sanja, who at this time was the best swimming athlete in the high school and was doing a swimming competition. With full of anxiety and worry, Imsul immediately hugged Sanja, which made Sanja surprised, and the security immediately dragged Imsul out. At this time Imsul still does not realize that she has gone to the past. Imsul still thinks that she will soon go to the afterlife, because to her knowledge people who have died will experience beautiful things first before going to heaven. Even when Sanja came to return Imsul's watch, she immediately hugged Sanja and invited Sanja to live together. But not long after that Imsul's mother called and told Imsul to go home immediately, and from there Imsul realized that the world she lived in now was not a dream, but she had gone to the past. Imsul was very happy when she saw that her mother was still young and her grandmother was not senile and still remembered her, and the greatest happiness she felt was that her legs could function normally again. The next day, Imsul happily rushed to school to meet Sanja. When they met, Imsul still felt sad about the bad luck that Sanja would experience in the future. After that they finally got acquainted. There Sanja asked why Imsul was always sad when she saw him. Sanja also asked why Imsul could know if he was a swimming athlete. Imsul also said that the reason she always cried when she saw Sanja was because Sanja reminded her of something she really cared about, and Imsul admitted that she was a big fan of Sanja as a swimming athlete. Hearing that, Sanja, who at this time was still a teenager, did not believe Imsul's words. Sanja then handed over Imsul's watch that Imsul had given him. Seeing that Imsul was embarrassed because she remembered that she had hugged Sanja before, so Imsul immediately left. Arriving in class, Imsul seemed to be feeling a reunion, because she could reunite with her classmates including Hunju, who was still fat. Then during class hours, Imsul was still curious whether the watch she had could take her back to the future. Imsul then tried to press the button on the clock but nothing happened. After that, Imsul returned to see Sanja, who was practicing. At the same time Imsul's attention was distracted when she saw cigarette smoke from the back of the class. Imsul looked shocked when school delinquent tried to assaulting on a student named Kim Taesung. Imsul tried to break up the fight, but not long after the other school delinquent came until Taesung immediately took Imsul away. At this time Taesung was a naughty student because he liked to smoke and often skipped school, and Taesung turned out to like Imsul. The next day, Imsul, who had just arrived at school, saw a pamphlet for the swimming championship tournament that Sanja would participate in. Imsul immediately remembered that the tournament would be the end of Sanja's career as a swimming athlete, because Sanja would suffer severe injuries. Imsul tried to remind Sanja not to participate in the swimming tournament, but strangely when Imsul tried to tell future events to Sanja, suddenly time stopped and Sanja did not hear what Imsul was talking about future events. Even Imsul also tried to write future events, but the writing faded by itself, making Imsul even more worried about Sanja. Imsul continued to try to convince Sanja not to overdo it in training, even asking Sanja to better withdraw from the tournament, but Sanja, who really loved his hobby as a swimming athlete, did not want to obey the advice of Imsul. Not giving up with that, in the evening Imsul again tried to convince Sanja by disguising herself as a psychic grandma and scaring Sanja not to participate in the swimming tournament, because on Sanja's shoulders there was a ghost of water that could make Sanja's shoulders hurt, but Sanja seemed not to believe Imsul's words and immediately left there. Imsul, who was still confused about how to convince Sanja, accidentally met Taesung, who looked a little bony because he was involved in a fight. Imsul immediately treated Taesung and reminded Taesung not to fight often. Seeing the attention given by Imsul, Taesung liked Imsul even more and Taesung continued to follow Imsul to the front of the house. But unexpectedly Sanja was also there and realized that he had been lied to by Imsul, who was disguised as a psychic, and thought that Imsul was mocking his shoulder pain. But Imsul did not mean to mock Sanja and just wanted to remind him, but Sanja, who was already disappointed, went straight to his house. At home, Sanja could not sleep because he kept remembering Imsul's words about his shoulder. He decided to practice that night, but apparently Sanja's rival athlete named Hyungu was secretly following Sanja, and tried to tease Sanja by taking Sanja's underwear, but it could be prevented because it turned out that Imsul was also secretly following Sanja. Imsul tried to take back Sanja's panties from Hyungu, but because Sanja had arrived, Imsul had to hide, and in the end Imsul was caught by Sanja, making the two of them involved in a chase and ended up splashing in the pond. Sanja, who knows that Imsul is stalking him, he scolds Imsul and asks what is the reason for Imsul to continue stalking him. Imsul, who is actually worried, is eager to tell bad future events that will happen to Sanja. But again when Imsul reminded about future events, time suddenly stopped, so Imsul only reasoned that she only wanted to protect Sanja. Hearing that, Sanja, who was fed up, immediately left Imsul, because Imsul was considered to always do abnormal things to him. Imsul was getting upset, sad, worried and confused about how to save Sanja from the bad things that would happen to him, when the confusion seemed to lose direction and instead walked to the middle of the road, and when a car was about to hit her, luckily Sanja came to save Imsul, because previously Sanja was called by his friend who told him that the person who tried to take his underwear was not Imsul but his rival athlete, Hyungu. Sanja was very worried about Imsul because all this time Sanja, who looked like he was indifferent to women, it turned out that he really loved Imsul. It happened when Sanja first met Imsul. Sanja immediately fell in love with the beauty and kindness of Imsul. Long story short, Sanja also apologized for the misunderstanding about his swimming trunks, and now Sanja said that he would take part in the swimming tournament and would win the tournament, and asked Imsul not to worry about him. After saying goodbye to Imsul, Sanja's behavior was seen to have a crush on Imsul, which was witnessed by his friend Inhyuk, who knew that Sanja had never declared love to Imsul. He also advised Sanja to immediately declare love to Imsul. With full confidence, Sanja promised to do so when he won the swimming tournament, but Inhyuk again gave Sanja advice, namely to declare Sanja's feelings at the right moment. The next day the high school swimming tournament began. Sanja was very excited when his match was witnessed directly by Imsul, and when the match took place Imsul worriedly kept hoping that a miracle would happen, so that Sanja would not get injured. It turned out that what Imsul expected really happened. Sanja managed to win the match without getting injured, making Imsul very relieved and happy. The next day, Sanja took Imsul out for a walk and was going to confess his feelings, but because he was nervous, when Sanja was taking a picture with Imsul and felt that the moment was the right moment, Sanja tried to confess his feelings, but because it took too long the moment was interrupted by their finished photo, making Sanja feel a little disappointed. When they returned home, Sanja felt that this moment was the right moment. He again tried to express his feelings to Imsul, saying he did not want Imsul to only be his fan. Hearing that, Imsul thought that Sanja would stay away from her, so Imsul immediately cut the conversation by saying that she would only be his friend, and again the moment that was right had to fail again. Inhyuk, who had supported Sanja, was disappointed that Sanja was not to the point in expressing his feelings, but even so Sanja still looked very happy with the beautiful moment with Imsul earlier. The next day, Sanja returned to swimming practice to participate in a national tournament. Unexpectedly his shoulder injury returned. After being examined by a doctor, it turned out that Sanja's injury had to be surgery on, which would have side effects and make Sanja have to stop being a swimming athlete. Hearing that, Sanja was very saddened by the circumstances he experienced, and his dream as a swimming athlete he had to bury deeply. Even Sanja felt bad for his father named Gundok, who was preparing to celebrate Sanja's victory. At that time Sanja directly told his father if he wanted to stop being a swimming athlete without telling him the real reason. Gundok was furious with his son's decision, because he had already signed Sanja up for special training abroad. When Sanja still did not want to tell the real reason why he wanted to stop being a swimming athlete, his father also sent Sanja not to return home until his decision was changed. While Imsul was told by Sanja's friend that Sanja had suffered an injury that made him quit swimming, Imsul felt that her efforts to save Sanja from future bad events could not be changed. The next day when Imsul asked Inhyuk about Sanja's whereabouts, suddenly a ball hit her and gave Imsul a nosebleed. Imsul remembered that the incident was exactly the same as what she had experienced in the past. Imsul immediately remembered that there would be a fire incident at her house. Imsul immediately called her mother and brother, but Imsul's call was not answered. Feeling that there was no time left, Imsul asked Taesung for help to take her home immediately, and sure enough Imsul's brother named Limjem even fought with Hunju without caring that his house was on fire. Shortly thereafter Imsul and Taesung came and they both finally managed to put out the fire. It made Imsul finally realized if an event that would happen in the future she could change. While Gundok, who just found out if his son was injured, he also felt very sad about the fate of his son. Gundok directly meet Sanja and apologize for expelling him. Sanja's father will not force his son to become a swimming athlete anymore. Hearing that, Sanja felt sad because the dream that had been supported by his father had to be buried deeply.
나만 나쁜 애비 만들어.
무슨 솜사탕인 줄.
일을 하냐, 혼내기를 하냐. 응? 월요일에 병원 예약해 뒀으니까.
죄송해요.
The next day Imsul provided food for Sanja by entrusting it to Gundok. Feeling that Imsul was very attentive to his son, Gundok also gave a syrup to Imsul as a form of gratitude. Imsul really enjoyed the syrup until she finished it. Without Imsul realizing that the syrup contained alcohol which made her drunk, and when she was drunk, Imsul went straight to Sanja, who was in the swimming pool. There Sanja was so surprised and shocked by Imsul's drunken condition. but Imsul with such conditions could actually break the ice, so Sanja immediately expressed his feelings to Imsul, and finally they kissed. The next day, Sanja, who felt his love had been accepted, he eagerly approached Imsul, but Sanja immediately became emotional when Taesung declared love to Imsul in front of him. But strange events occurred again when Imsul, who intended to reject Taesung's love, suddenly returned to the future, and when she woke up Imsul was already in the same hospital as the late Sanja. Imsul immediately checked the situation there. It seemed that Sanja's father was sad his son died. Soon the police came to ask Imsul for information, while showing a photo of Sanja and herself when taking pictures together in the past. Seeing that, Imsul was shocked and finally realized, if it turned out that when she went to the past and tried to change the bad luck that befell Sanja, it turned out that she slowly managed to change the future. Then Imsul tried to return to the river and press the button on her watch to return to the past, but this time Imsul could not do it. In a moment of anguish, Imsul saw the news about the reason why Sanja committed suicide due to severe depression. It made Imsul feel even more sad. Shortly thereafter, at exactly 12 p.m. suddenly Imsul's watch glowed again. Imsul guessed that at that time she could return to the past, and sure enough, when Imsul pressed the button on her watch, she was able to return to the past. When Imsul realized that she was being prayed for because Imsul's mother, named Baksun, told her daughter that Imsul always felt lost and like being possessed by the devil. At the same time Imsul saw Sanja and approached him, but strangely Sanja suddenly became indifferent to Imsul, making Imsul think hard about everything that happened. Imsul, who has now returned to the past, finally realized that this is an opportunity to be able to change Sanja's fate significantly in the future. Imsul also tried to pay attention to Sanja by giving some psychology books so that Sanja would not be depressed, but Sanja still looked indifferent to Imsul and just left. Imsul, who tried to catch up with him, fell. Shortly Taesung came to help and called Imsul with a sweetheart. Hearing that, Imsul was immediately shocked and asked why Taesung called her sweetheart. Taesung then explained that Imsul really loved him when Taesung expressed love, and that was the reason why Sanja was indifferent to her. Imsul finally realized that when she returned to the future, Imsul's personality in the past would change, after which Imsul returned to look for Sanja, but she was intercepted by a woman named Gayan. Gayan immediately grabbed Imsul because Imsul dared to date Taesung, a man that Gayan really liked. Hearing that, Imsul told Gayan that she would soon break up with Taesung, but because Gayan did not believe Imsul's words, Gayan became even more angry and Imsul tried to fight back until an argument ensued. Not long after, a teacher named Kim came to break them up. Seeing Mr. Kim, Imsul then remembered that Mr. Kim was the head of the agency from Sanja and the Eclipse Band. Imsul then saw Mr. Kim give his agency card to Sanja, so when she returned home Imsul tried to take the card by entering Sanja's room secretly without Sanja's father knew. Imsul finally managed to find the agency card and tore it so that Sanja did not audition, but soon Sanja's father came, making Imsul panic, which made her hide until the night. While Sanja, who just came home and finished bathing, he also felt hallucinations when he saw Imsul sleeping in his room, but when Sanja's feet touched Imsul, Sanja finally realized that Imsul in his room was not a hallucination. Sanja was immediately shocked and tried to wake Imsul. Sanja, who had been indifferent to Imsul, instead returned to being fascinated when he saw Imsul, who was fast asleep, and in the end Imsul was awakened. Sanja immediately asked why Imsul was in his room. Imsul said that she wanted to give books on psychology to Sanja, but Sanja did not believe Imsul's words. Sanja then mentioned the incident when he declared love to Imsul, but Imsul said that at that time she was drunk and did not remember anything. Hearing that, Sanja felt disappointed in Imsul and immediately took Imsul out of his house. He then expressed his disappointment to Imsul, because Imsul did not take his feelings seriously and only played with him, and it made Sanja sad. Hearing that, Imsul explained that she did not intend to play with Sanja's love and instead Imsul was very worried about Sanja, but Sanja, who was already disappointed, immediately asked Imsul not to approach him again, which made Imsul even more sad and worried about Sanja, and was afraid that Sanja would experience frustration because of her. The next day, Imsul met with Taesung and broke off their relationship, and Imsul asked Taesung not to approach her again when her personality changed or when Imsul returned to the future. Hearing that, Taesung just smiled. Soon Taesung showed news about Sanja, who successfully auditioned for the band, making Imsul worried and immediately looked for Sanja. But at the audition site Imsul only met with Inhyuk. Inhyuk told her that Sanja had gone to his father's place. Hearing that, Imsul immediately rushed to meet Sanja. Inhyuk then called Sanja and told him that Imsul was looking for him and would come to Sanja's place. At first Sanja didn't care because he was still disappointed with Imsul, but because of Imsul's concern for him, Sanja changed his mind and immediately approached Imsul, who turned out that Imsul fell asleep on the bus and got off in a quiet place. In that place Imsul was disturbed by a drunk who scared Imsul and tried to call the police. The drunk continued to harass Imsul until she fell and drowned in the river. Shortly thereafter Sanja came to help, and at first glance Imsul remembered the events in the past when she had an accident, and after Sanja managed to save Imsul, finally Imsul realized that the person who had saved her from the accident that made her paralyzed was Sanja. Imsul was very sad because she hated Sanja even though he had saved her. In short, when returning home it was seen that Sanja was very worried about Imsul's condition. Sanja immediately reminded Imsul to be careful and not sleep carelessly on the bus. Hearing that Imsul was very happy because Sanja was no longer angry with her, and Imsul just realized that Sanja had always cared about her. Since then the two have made up again. Imsul gave a gift in the form of a time capsule to Sanja, and told Sanja to bury it and can only be opened on January 1, 2023. Hearing that Sanja asked the reason, Imsul reasoned that if Sanja opened the time capsule on that date then it would be very meaningful to Imsul, even though Imsul did it so that the future could change and Sanja did not commit suicide. The next day, Imsul went to the police station to ask about the cell phone that was allegedly stolen by a drunk on the bridge, but the police who were busy working on other cases instead asked Imsul to go home immediately. Imsul, who was still curious, decided to go to the location where her cell phone was stolen. There were many people who were gathering because a dead body was found buried. Then when Imsul heard the sound of the gurgling keys belonging to a taxi driver, Imsul remembered a bad incident that had happened to her, and it turned out that this taxi driver had taken Imsul's cell phone. The next day, Hunju, who was stuck with school lessons, invited Imsul to watch a music concert. Unexpectedly there Imsul met Taesung, who would perform at the concert. Taesung thinks that Imsul came to watch it, but Imsul said that she came because she was invited by Hunju, and unexpectedly Sanja was also there and even wore the same outfit as Taesung, until the two, who both had a crush on Imsul, ended up competing with each other. When the concert began, Imsul was surprised because the name of the band that performed was Eclipse. After finishing performing, Sanja then chatted with Mr. Kim. Imsul, who was worried, intended to go to Sanja, but Sanja was gone. When returning home, the worried Imsul immediately asked if Sanja made a deal with Mr. Kim. Sanja replied that he had not made any deal with Mr. Kim regarding his debut. Hearing that, Imsul was relieved because most likely Sanja's future would change. Sanja then gave a new cell phone to Imsul, but Imsul did not care about the cell phone, and instead asked Sanja not to think about things that would frustrate him and asked Sanja to choose a life that made him happy. Not understanding Imsul's words, Sanja immediately left, but Sanja apparently thought about Imsul's words that told him to choose a happy life. Sanja decided to immediately declare love to Imsul because that would make his life happy. Hearing that, Imsul was very surprised and did not expect if Sanja actually loved her. Imsul, who was still in shock, then immediately left Sanja. Even at home Imsul continued to think about Sanja's words and Imsul wondered why Sanja could like her. Then elsewhere Taesung was confiding in being dumped by Imsul, and it turned out that the conversation was overheard by Sanja. Sanja, who accidentally heard, felt happy because Taesung's rival seemed to have lost. Imsul, who now realizes that all this time Sanja loved her, she was made awkward when she saw Sanja's romantic and very attentive treatment to her. When the two returned home, Taesung was waiting for Imsul and asked Imsul to talk face to face. Sanja, who heard it, immediately looked jealous, but because he wanted to show a mature attitude to Imsul, Sanja also smilingly invited the two to talk. It turned out that Taesung, who still did not accept his relationship with Imsul, broke up. Taesung again expressed his feelings for Imsul, but Imsul immediately rejected him with emotion because she never loved Taesung at all. It made Taesung upset until he lost concentration while riding a motorcycle, and finally had an accident. In the morning, Imsul prepares to take her mother, who will go on vacation. Imsul looks so happy to see her mother, who goes with a man who Imsul thinks is her mother's lover. While elsewhere, a suspicious taxi driver calls Imsul's grandmother, and says that he found Imsul's cell phone and wants to return it. Imsul's grandmother innocently gives Imsul's home address to the taxi driver. The next day Sanja invited Imsul to watch a baseball game, but at that time Imsul was made uneasy by Sanja, who continued to pay small attention to her. Feeling that the moment was very appropriate, Sanja invited Imsul to go and then returned to declare love to Imsul. Not having time to answer, suddenly Sanja got a call from Taesung, who was being treated. Taesung told him if he saw Boksun, Imsul's mother, who was in the same hospital with him. Sanja immediately told Imsul and they immediately went to the hospital. Imsul was very sad to know that her mother turned out to say goodbye not for a vacation, but went to undergo surgery due to an illness. and at that moment Imsul finally gave an answer to Sanja, who expressed her feelings. Imsul turned out to reject Sanja's feelings and asked Sanja not to love her. Hearing that, Sanja was immediately upset, but Imsul did it not because she did not want to return Sanja's love, but Imsul had to go to the future because this time was the night she would have a bad incident, and Imsul wanted to go to the future to avoid that incident. Imsul then decided to stay at home while waiting for midnight so that she could return to the future, but Sanja suddenly invited her to meet. Imsul, who still felt guilty, tried to catch up with Sanja, but it turned out that a suspicious taxi driver was already in front of her, making Imsul immediately remember the bad events that had happened to her. It turns out that this taxi driver is a psychopath who tried to kill Imsul and caused Imsul to become paralyzed, although in the end Imsul was saved by Sanja, and in the present the incident is repeated. Imsul, who did not have time to go to the future, was kidnapped and will be killed by the driver. While Sanja, who had passed by the taxi that kidnapped Imsul, he just realized when he saw the umbrella that Imsul was wearing. Sanja, who panicked, immediately asked Imsul's whereabouts to Imsul's brother, but Limjem did not know where Imsul was, but previously Imsul said she would go to a bridge. Hearing that, Sanja immediately asked the police to find Imsul's whereabouts, but the police did not care and argued that they were busy, which made a disappointed Sanja decide to follow Imsul to the bridge, while Imsul, who was exhausted and covered in wounds, continued to be chased by a taxi driver with his car. Imsul was already resigned, but soon Sanja and his father came to save Imsul. Sanja, who was panicked, asked about Imsul's condition, but suddenly Imsul returned to the future and was surprised to find that her legs were not paralyzed, and Imsul finally realized that now she had managed to change her destiny, as well as Sanja, who did not die and instead succeeded in becoming a film actor. This makes Imsul very happy and grateful because the bad destiny that befell Sanja has now changed, and because tonight is the day Imsul made an appointment with Sanja to open the time capsule they once buried. Imsul immediately went to the place, but unfortunately Sanja was not there. Meanwhile, Sanja now looks very happy with his profession as a movie actor. While he was chatting with Inhyuk, suddenly a fanatic fan forced open the door to Sanja's apartment, but it was immediately prevented by the security guard and the woman managed to escape. Sanja immediately reported the woman to the police. At the same time, the woman accidentally bumped into Imsul, and as a result Imsul was arrested because her appearance was similar to the female fan. Imsul was examined by the police, and after being examined finally Imsul was released and not sued by Sanja. The next morning, Imsul looked so happy and did not expect that she was now working at the film company that had rejected her. Imsul's boss asked Imsul to explain the incident that made Imsul taken to the police station. Imsul also said that she was not the one who stalked at Sanja's apartment. Hearing that, Imsul's boss also told Imsul to meet with Sanja and explain directly all these misunderstandings, so that Sanja would be willing to play a movie for their company. Imsul was surprised and happy. When they were about to meet, unfortunately Imsul got an emergency call from Hunju, who apparently was going to give birth. Imsul, who panicked, rushed to the hospital, even bumping into Sanja, who had just arrived to make Sanja splash, but because she was in a hurry Imsul did not have time to meet face to face with Sanja, and Imsul only gave her cell phone number to Sanja's manager. At the hospital, Imsul was so shocked because Hunju turned out to be married to her brother at this time, and they had 2 children, making Imsul shocked because Hunju had become her sister-in-law. The next day, Imsul received a summons from the police for pushing Sanja to the ground, where Imsul was asked to sign an agreement so that she would no longer approach Sanja. Then when the police said that Sanja would hold a concert of his eclipsed band, it made Imsul shocked because Sanja's destiny as a band vocalist had not completely changed. Imsul immediately came to the concert venue to meet Sanja's manager, and left a flower containing her business card to be given to Sanja so that she could meet, but the moment when she first attended this concert was repeated, from her cell phone falling to her enjoying the concert from outside the stadium, making Imsul remember that she would meet Sanja on the bridge. Imsul immediately rushed there, but Imsul was grateful that Sanja did not come, which meant that Sanja's destiny had changed, but Imsul was surprised because Sanja was behind her. Sanja could come there because he knew from the Imsul business card he received. Even on the day of opening the time capsule that they buried together, Sanja had already taken it and was waiting for Imsul's presence, but because Imsul never came, Sanja opened it alone. Inside the capsule is a letter written by Imsul in the past, which expresses Imsul's gratitude to Sanja for being present in her life. While now Imsul is still worried about Sanja because tonight is the night Sanja will commit suicide, Imsul immediately invites Sanja to spend the night at the hotel. Hearing that, Sanja was immediately nervous. Arriving at the hotel, Imsul first apologized to Sanja for the incident that made Sanja splash, but Sanja did not mind it. Not long after that, Inhyuk called Sanja to tell him that the news that Sanja was now with Imsul was known by reporters and had gone viral. Hearing that, Sanja decided to leave and asked Imsul to go home so that the reporters would not cover it, but Imsul, who would not leave Sanja alone tonight, Imsul recklessly, while covering her face, immediately took Sanja away with her. Upon arrival at Sanja's apartment, Imsul immediately asked permission to go to the bathroom because of a call from her mother. Imsul also told her mother that she would stay overnight. Sanja, who accidentally overheard Imsul's conversation, felt very happy, but Sanja hid his happiness in front of Imsul. Sanja then invited Imsul to tour his apartment. When Sanja was preparing the room for Imsul, he panicked when Imsul saw on Sanja's bed there was a picture of a waifu that was thought to be Sanja's collection. Then when Imsul tried to take it, the romantic and awkward moment happened again when they fell and looked at each other. But the moment was stopped when Inhyuk, who had just returned home, saw them. The panicked Sanja immediately hid Imsul into the closet and immediately told Inhyuk to leave. But Inhyuk, who glimpsed Imsul, immediately asked why Sanja loved Imsul so much, even though there were many other women who were more beautiful and willing to be single for years just to wait for Imsul's arrival. Hearing that, Imsul felt sorry for not immediately returning Sanja's love, and instead told Sanja to stay away from her. The next day, Sanja drove Imsul home, and after knowing all the sacrifices and sincere love from Sanja, Imsul finally returned Sanja's feelings of love and apologized if all this time she had made Sanja wait and keep hoping. After saying that, a nervous Imsul went straight to her house, but soon after, Sanja came to make sure whether Imsul really loved him. With full awareness, Imsul assured that she really loved Sanja very much. Hearing that, Sanja finally kissed Imsul with full love, but without them realizing that the psychopathic driver was still alive and seemed to be watching the two of them. Long story short, Sanja and Imsul are now officially dating. Sanja then called Imsul to meet tonight. Imsul happily agreed to Sanja's invitation. Then when Imsul was about to leave, she was suddenly surprised by a woman who fell in front of her. Shortly after, the security guard came and told her that the woman was a stalker. Imsul immediately chased the woman and managed to catch her. It turned out that the woman was just a teenager who was a big fan of Sanja. Imsul immediately advised the teenager not to idolize someone too much and even disturb the privacy of her idol. At the same time, Imsul was very surprised when she saw the news that Sanja had been attacked by someone until he was injured and unconscious. It turned out that the person who had made Sanja dying was a psychopathic taxi driver named Yongsu, who had just been released from prison for his previous crime of trying to kill Imsul. Imsul, who knew that, was surprised why Yongsu attacked Sanja. Imsul, who was worried, immediately rushed to see Sanja's condition, but Imsul did not dare to enter the room because Sanja's father was still sad. Imsul then intended to go back in time to change Sanja's fate from this incident, but because her watch was not there, Imsul immediately went to Sanja's apartment and looked for the watch, but Imsul did not find it. Shortly thereafter, Inhyuk came. Imsul then asked where Sanja's watch was. Inhyuk also told her that Sanja's watch was gone. Hearing that, Imsul immediately fainted because she felt that she had no chance to save Sanja. After that, Imsul saw the news that reported that Sanja was the one who helped the police to arrest Yongsu in 2009. Imsul suspected that Sanja did it to save herself, and when Imsul read a document given by a police officer named Wanchul, Imsul finally found out that in the past she had experienced terror from Yongsu again, and Sanja managed to save Imsul. Knowing that, Imsul felt sad and shed tears. While at home, Imsul continued to look for Sanja's watch, and she finally found it because it was her grandmother who turned out to keep the watch. Imsul was finally able to go to the past precisely in 2009 when Imsul and Hunju had become college students. Imsul, who did not want to waste time because at this time Yongsu would target her again, she immediately went to the police and reported all the crimes committed by Yongsu to her in the past, and she did it so that Yongsu would not meet with Sanja. When returning home, Imsul accidentally met Taesung. Imsul was very happy to see Taesung, who is now a businessman in the fashion field, and it turns out that Taesung is the son of Wanchul police officer, while Sanja was seen by his father, who gave an offer to undergo rehabilitation treatment for shoulder injuries abroad, so that Sanja can recover and continue his dream of becoming a swimming athlete. But Sanja is still considering his father's offer because he still can't seem to move on from Imsul, who hasn't reciprocated his feelings so far. In a different place, Wanchul went to Yongsu's house, but he didn't find Yongsu because the house suddenly caught fire. The next day, Wanchul told Imsul about last night's incident. Hearing that, Imsul immediately rushed to the police station, but Imsul was stopped by Sanja, who apparently knew that the current Imsul was Imsul from the future. Imsul, who was shocked, then asked how Sanja could find out. Sanja explained that he had heard Imsul singing Sanja's latest song, even though he had not finished arranging the song. Sanja then asked how Imsul could travel through time. Imsul then explained that she could travel through time using only Sanja's watch. Sanja again asked what Imsul's goal was to come to this time. Imsul explained that she wanted to change someone's destiny, but she did not say directly if the destiny Imsul meant was Sanja's destiny. Hearing that, Sanja felt that Imsul would dump him again because his feelings had not been reciprocated. Sanja then said that he would not expect Imsul anymore because he would go abroad to undergo shoulder therapy, knowing that Imsul was very supportive if Sanja went abroad, because it would make Sanja unable to meet with Yongsu. The next day Sanja was told by his father, who had met with Imsul earlier, if Imsul was very supportive of Sanja doing therapy abroad. Hearing that, Sanja immediately agreed to go abroad for therapy. While Imsul was now at the police station and there, Wonchul told her about yesterday's investigation at Yongsu's house. When Yongsu's house caught fire, Wonchul found a small amount of blood stains, and after DNA testing, the blood stains belonged to one of Yongsu's crime victims. Therefore Yongsu had been named a suspect and would soon be arrested. Hearing that certainly made Imsul very relieved. Imsul was then asked to point to a photo of the car that Yongsu had driven when he was going to kill her. The next day, Imsul was surprised by Taesung, who came to see her. At first Imsul thought that Taesung would chase her again, but Taesung was very worried about Imsul if at any time she would be killed by Yongsu, who was now on the run. Taesung could find out about it from his father. Hearing that, Imsul also asked Taesung for help to tell his father to protect Sanja in the future, precisely in 2023. Taesung also questioned the reason why his father had to protect Sanja in the future. Imsul could not tell the real reason because time suddenly stopped when she was about to tell about the bad destiny experienced by Sanja in the future. After that, Taesung, who was worried about Imsul's safety, decided to take Imsul home. Arriving at the house, it was seen that Sanja was there helping Boksun collect leaking rainwater. Taesung, who did not want to lose to Sanja, immediately replaced Boksun to collect rainwater. Until they competed to help Imsul's family. Even the two of them got into an argument because Taesung said that he still loved Imsul, but the argument stopped when a lamp almost struck Taesung's body, and luckily Imsul managed to turn off the electricity switch. After that, Sanja, who did not accept that Taesung was allowed to stay overnight by Boksun, forbade him on the grounds that Taesung had to stay at his house. There, Taesung told Sanja not to be overly jealous of him, and asked Sanja to take care of himself because Imsul asked Taesung's father to protect Sanja, but when Sanja asked why, Taesung did not tell him. The next day Sanja said goodbye to his father to go abroad and undergo therapy, while Imsul looked so happy when Sanja had left, because Sanja would now not deal with Yongsu. When returning home, suddenly Imsul saw a car that was very similar to Yongsu's. Imsul, who panicked, immediately ran to avoid it. Unexpectedly, Sanja suddenly appeared in front of her, making Imsul weak and disappointed. Imsul, who was worried, then asked why Sanja did not go abroad. Sanja also explained that he already knew the destiny that would befall him in the future, namely to die in order to protect Imsul. Sanja knew this because previously Sanja had dug up the time capsule they used to bury together, which contained a clock and a letter written by Imsul, which reads that Imsul is grateful to Sanja for being present in her life, and from that Sanja finally realized that Imsul also loves him very much, and now Sanja asks Imsul not to avoid him, because Sanja does not mind and is even willing if he has to die to protect Imsul. Sanja immediately kissed Imsul, and their kiss was almost seen by Imsul's mother, but Sanja managed to cover Imsul. After that, Sanja told Imsul not to worry about him, because Sanja was sure that he would still be alive and could meet Imsul in the future, but Imsul still felt worried because Yongsu was still on the loose. While at home, Imsul immediately contacted Wonchul, and told him that she saw a car that was suspected of belonging to Yongsu in front of her house. Imsul then asked Wonchul to immediately check it out, while Sanja was being scolded by his father for not going abroad to undergo therapy, but Sanja explained that he was no longer interested in becoming a swimming athlete, because his body was no longer as good as before his injury. His father also understood it and could only support Sanja's choice. The morning saw Sanja and Imsul living a very happy life because they were already dating. Soon after, Sanja was called by Inhyuk to audition for the band, but because Sanja was with Imsul, he refused and prayed for Inhyuk to qualify for the next round, because Sanja still wanted to spend beautiful moments with Imsul. Elsewhere, Wonchul and his friend look at CCTV footage and finally find Yongsu's car going to a pay phone, and after the police investigate his call history, Yongsu turns out to be calling an animal feed place as well as an illegal slaughterhouse. Wonchul also realizes that Yongsu uses animal anesthetics to paralyze his victims. Wonchul and his friend are preparing to arrest Yongsu at that place. In the evening, Taesung met Imsul, and told her that the car that taught Imsul that night really belonged to Yongsoo. Taesung, who was worried, asked Imsul to immediately tell this to her family, but unfortunately the conversation was interrupted by Sanja, who came and thought that Taesung was approaching Imsul, and to resolve this misunderstanding Taesung decided to invite Sanja to drink together. Taesung congratulated Sanja on his relationship with Imsul, but Sanja asked what Taesung had talked about with Imsul, but Taesung did not tell him in detail and only said that his father was looking for Yongsoo, making Sanja very curious about Yongsoo's figure, and since that conversation Taesung and Sanja became friends. Elsewhere, it was seen that Yongsoo, who was taking medicine, was finally caught by Wonchul and his friend. Wonchul immediately informed Imsul if Yongsoo had been arrested. Hearing the news, Imsul was relieved, and with a sense of happiness she rushed off to watch Sanja's performance with his band. But unexpectedly it turned out that Yongsoo managed to escape, because the police car carrying him had an accident and made Wonchul unconscious. Knowing the incident, Taesung, who was worried, immediately went to the hospital to see his father's condition. It turned out that Wonchul was conscious even though he had injuries that made him have to get special treatment, while Sanja finally found out Yongsoo's face from the news, as well as Imsul, who panicked because Yongsoo managed to escape. In short, Imsul is seen meeting Wonchul, who is back on duty. Imsul asks Wonchul to monitor and catch Yongsoo, who will come on the 10th around the building, and Imsul will lure Yongsoo out. Hearing that, Wonchul disagrees because Imsul's plan just now will endanger Imsul. But Imsul persuaded Wonchul to do it because Yongsoo would not come out if she was not lured, and it turned out that Sanja had overheard their conversation. Sanja immediately entered the building where Imsul would lure Yongsoo, and Sanja wondered why Imsul wanted to protect himself without thinking about the consequences that Imsul would receive later. After that, Imsul asks when Sanja will sign his band contract with Mr. Kim's agency, but Sanja will not sign the contract before Inhyuk comes because Inhyuk has no news since the audition. Worried about that, Sanja and Imsul decided to meet Inhyuk at his boarding house, but there was only Taesung, who just woke up. Taesung also explained that Inhyuk had returned to the village, because Inhyuk was embarrassed and could not mentally be laughed at by netizens because of his falseness during the audition. Hearing that, Sanja decided to come to Inhyuk's village with Taesung and Imsul. Arriving at the village, Sanja saw Inhyuk, who thought he was going to commit suicide because of his disappointment, but it turned out that Inhyuk just wanted to take his buoy, after which they were entertained by Inhyuk's parents, and shortly thereafter Imsul called her mother and told her that she was in the village of Daopuri to visit Inhyuk, but it turned out that the conversation was overheard by Yongsoo, who was in the Boksun shop. Yongsoo is seen rushing to go to the village where Imsul is, while now Inhyuk looks happy again when spending time with Sanja, Taesung and Imsul to catch a goat, and the friendship between them is getting closer. Sanja asked Inhyuk not to continue to be sad, because his failure at the audition was not the end of everything, and Sanja invited Inhyuk to get back together to advance the band they made. Then when going home, Imsul just realized that her cell phone fell while catching goats. Imsul and Sanja returned to the hill to look for the cell phone, but along the way Imsul glimpsed her shadow, who was avoiding something. Arriving at the hill, Sanja told Imsul to wait while he would look for Imsul's cell phone. Then when Sanja found Imsul's cell phone, Sanja was so panicked when Imsul was not there. It turned out that Imsul was at the end of the hill and looked like she was scared. When Sanja asked if there was something Imsul wanted to say, Imsul did not answer him and immediately invited Sanja to leave the hill. In the morning, Sanja, Imsul and Taesung said goodbye before going home, but while on the train, Imsul's attitude suddenly turned sensitive and seemed to avoid Sanja. Then Imsul asked permission to leave for a while and said that she was feeling confused, but it turned out that Imsul deliberately did that and let Sanja go home first, because Imsul previously saw a glimpse of the future if she would be targeted by Yongsoo in the hills earlier, and Imsul, who did not want to involve Sanja, decided to change her destiny alone, and it turned out that Yongsoo had arrived there to target Imsul, but Imsul did not see him. Soon Imsul gets a call from her mother, who will pick up Imsul home, because her mother was told by Wonchul if Imsul was once kidnapped by Yongsoo, who is now still at large, but Imsul refuses to be picked up and argues that she will be fine because she is with Sanja. But Sanja, who just arrived, immediately panicked when told by Boksun, while Imsul immediately called Mr. Wonchul and asked for help to come there immediately. Sanja, who panicked because Imsul had not returned, finally realized that Imsul did it so that Sanja did not meet with Yongsoo. For that, Sanja immediately rushed back to catch up with Imsul. While Imsul is seen waiting for Mr. Wonchul to come, soon Wonchul finally comes and will monitor Imsul's movements to lure Yongsoo. Then when Imsul leaves, it turns out that Yongsoo is following her, but Yongsoo, who realizes that Imsul, who is walking alone, is a lure, Yongsoo decides to leave. But in the middle of the road, Yongsoo bumped into Sanja, who was looking for Imsul. Sanja, who knew Yongsu's face, immediately chased him. Imsul, who received a report that Sanja was chasing Yongsu, immediately rushed to the hill, and sure enough, Sanja seemed to have been defeated by Yongsu. Yongsu was immediately secured by Wanchul, but unfortunately the injured Sanja fell into the sea, making Imsul panic and sad, seeing Sanja suffer a tragic fate and feeling that she failed to change Sanja's destiny, and suddenly Imsul was back in the future, precisely in 2023. Imsul, who still remembers all the romantic moments she had with Sanja, is now trying to move on with her routine as a movie producer. At that time Imsul got into trouble at work because she had to deal with the police because she quarreled with one of the actors. Then while at the office she met Taesung, who is now a policeman. Taesung was able to alleviate the charges given by the actor to Imsul, after which Taesung then invited Imsul to talk and said not to hesitate to ask him for help. Imsul was very grateful to Taesung, and because she was too drunk, Taesung had to carry Imsul to take her home. While waiting for a taxi, Imsul suddenly recalled her beautiful memories with Sanja, which made her cry. The next day Imsul was called by her boss and told that Imsul's problem with one of the actors had been resolved. Imsul was very relieved and even more happy when her boss would make a movie based on Imsul's writing. Imsul then submitted a budget proposal to her boss and tucked a red envelope in it, but the next day Imsul just realized if the contents in the envelope were a resignation letter, which contained a lot of words that demonized her boss because when writing Imsul was drunk. Then when the film event took place, Imsul secretly finally managed to take back the envelope from her boss's wallet, but unexpectedly when Imsul was about to leave she accidentally bumped into a man who turned out to be Sanja, who was still alive. The reason Sanja is still alive is because it turns out that when Sanja died, Imsul managed to press the watch button that allowed her to go to the distant past, precisely when Imsul was first going to meet Sanja, and Imsul also decided not to approach Sanja so that in the future it would not endanger Sanja's safety, but still now Imsul is reunited with Sanja. The next day, Imsul and Hunju, who now work in the same company, they are seen in a meeting to bring in an actor to play a movie from a script written by Imsul. Hunju also proposed Sanja to play in the movie and her boss agreed to Hunju's suggestion, and asked Hunju to send the script written by Imsul to Sanja. This makes Imsul nervous and afraid that she will meet with Sanja again. While Sanja is now reading the script that was sent by Hunju, it turns out that the contents of the movie script written by Imsul are the story of her love life with Sanja in the past. Sanja immediately shed tears as if he had experienced the incident. At the hotel, Imsul's boss told her that Sanja liked the script and was willing to act in the movie. Soon after Sanja came to make a deal with Imsul's boss, but when Sanja found out that Imsul wrote the script, Sanja immediately wanted to cancel the deal because Sanja thought that Imsul was a thief while at the movie event. But his manager asked Sanja to speak directly if he wanted to cancel the deal, but Sanja was immediately shocked when Imsul cancelled the deal first, because Sanja was deemed unfit to play a movie written by Imsul. Sanja was also emotional because he was the most proficient actor in playing a movie script, but Imsul argued that Sanja would not be suitable to be the lead, even though the real reason Imsul did it was to keep Sanja away from her life. Sanja, who felt belittled and challenged by Imsul's words, continued to try to persuade Imsul to make him the lead in the movie, but Imsul still rejected all of Sanja's efforts for Sanja's own good, because Imsul was afraid that Sanja would experience another bad incident if Sanja was in her life. After that Imsul got a call from her mother telling her that her grandmother had disappeared. Imsul panicked and immediately asked Taesung for help to see the police CCTV footage, but soon Imsul was called again by her mother and told her that her grandmother had been found. It turned out that Imsul's grandmother went to the Gundok restaurant. Imsul's grandmother then told that Gundok was her neighbor. Soon Sanja came there and accidentally saw a photo of grandma with Imsul. Sanja immediately rushed to meet Imsul to deliver her grandmother. As a thank you, Imsul also bought a glass of tea for Sanja. Sanja then tried again to convince Imsul that he was worthy of playing the movie, but still Imsul rejected him. While elsewhere the stalker girl reported an attempted kidnapping by someone to her, and after Taesung saw the CCTV footage it turned out that the person was Yongsu. The next day, Imsul stressed out trying to calm her mind by riding the Ferris wheel. Unexpectedly Sanja suddenly came and immediately sat in front of Imsul. Imsul was shocked and immediately asked why Sanja could be in this place. Sanja explained that he was filming an advertisement in that place. Sanja then said that when he read the script written by Imsul, he seemed to experience the incident. Sanja then said that he really wanted to be the main actor in the movie, but their conversation suddenly stopped when the wheel they were riding had a technical problem, and resulted in another awkward moment between the two, but because the weather was very cold suddenly Imsul suddenly had a fever until she was unconscious. Sanja, who was worried, immediately carried and took her to the hospital. The next day, Imsul, who had woken up, was immediately surprised because she was in Sanja's apartment. Imsul immediately rushed to leave, but Imsul accidentally bumped into Sanja. Sanja then told her that last night Imsul had a fever and he took care of Imsul. Hearing that, Imsul was very grateful to Sanja and promised to repay Sanja's kindness next time. But Sanja, who now has an interest in Imsul, then asks Imsul to eat together as a form of returning the favor to him. At that moment Sanja still gives small attention to Imsul, which certainly makes Imsul feel awkward. After that, Sanja wanted to take Imsul home. Fortunately, in the lobby of the apartment Imsul met Taesung, who was asking the whereabouts of Youngsu to the security guard there. Imsul immediately took advantage of the moment by asking Taesung to take her to the office. Sanja, who saw it, felt a little jealous. Meanwhile, Taesung and his friend looked at the CCTV footage. It turned out that Youngsu's taxi had crossed paths with Sanja's car. Taesung also felt that the recording on the dashboard of Sanja's car would be able to clarify the license plate of the car driven by Youngsu. Taesung also planned to meet Sanja and ask about it. In the morning, Sanja was visited by Taesung, who asked for the dashboard recording of his car to find out the license plate of Youngsu's taxi. And as usual, Taesung and Sanja at this time were still not familiar because they were competing again for Imsul, although in the end Sanja was willing to give Taesung the dashboard recording of his car. The next day Sanja and his management discussed the movie script with Imsul and her boss. Sanja suggested changing the set ending to a happy ending of the script, but Imsul, who objected, disagreed with Sanja's suggestion, because the story she wrote based on her life with Sanja would definitely have a bad ending, because if happy ending everything would be in vain. When Sanja returned home without further ado immediately declared love to Imsul. Imsul was again shocked and asked the reason why Sanja loved her. Sanja explained that he also did not understand everything he felt now. Hearing that, Imsul again rejected Sanja's love, and asked Sanja not to pursue her on the grounds that she had loved someone else, even though Imsul did not want Sanja to be close to her and suffered a tragic fate. Hearing that Sanja was willing and would not force Imsul to return his feelings. The next day, Sanja, who was about to start a film project, felt discouraged, because Imsul did not participate in working on the film project he was going to star in. Then when Sanja was about to go home, he suddenly remembered a song he had made in the past. The song was immediately sung by Sanja and recorded to be used as a film soundtrack. Imsul, who got the voice note recording of Sanja's song, and when she heard it immediately cried, because she remembered the beautiful moments with Sanja, and Imsul just realized that Sanja's memories in the past about the relationship with her did not disappear. While Taesung and his friend, who had found the license plate of the taxi allegedly driven by Youngsu, Taesung finally went to the taxi office where Youngsu worked, and after asking the owner of the taxi company about Youngsu's identity, Taesung was finally able to match the sketch of the kidnapper with Youngsu's photo, and indeed Youngsu was the perpetrator of the crime. Taesung planned to arrest Youngsu in the evening. After a long wait for Youngsu, Taesung finally met the psychopath. Taesung then asked Youngsu to get out of the car. Youngsu, who was not stupid, knew that Taesung was a policeman, because he saw an ID card in Taesung's friend's pocket. Youngsu immediately ran away and Taesung immediately chased him. In another place, Sanja suddenly felt dizzy and chest pain. He miraculously suddenly got all the beautiful memories and sad memories of being with Imsul, and realized that Imsul was her first and only love. During the dizzy condition, Sanja intended to approach the high school teenager who was thought to be Imsul, but Youngsu, who was involved in a chase with Taesung, suddenly drove by and intended to hit Sanja, but luckily Taesung crashed into Youngsu's car and managed to save Sanja. After successfully saving Sanja, Taesung then immediately chased Youngsu, who tried to escape, but a truck hit Youngsu until he sank into the river and died. While in another place, Imsul, who knew that Youngsu had died when he tried to hit Sanja, of course it made Imsul panic. While stuck in traffic, Imsul decided to run to see Sanja, who was currently hospitalized. When Sanja realized, he immediately rushed to go to see Imsul. They finally met and Sanja said that he had remembered everything about Imsul, who was the woman he loved. Imsul, who heard that, was of course surprised and happy. Imsul finally did not hesitate to express the longing that she had been harboring. After the incident, now the romantic moments of Imsul and Sanja continue to be shown, although at this time their relationship is still a secret because Sanja is a famous celebrity. Even so, Sanja always takes the time to meet Imsul on the sidelines of his busy schedule. After that, Imsul gave a gift to Taesung, who has always helped her. Now Taesung knows if Sanja is the man Imsul loves wholeheartedly, and Taesung finally gave up his feelings to see Imsul happy together with Sanja. Long story short, Imsul has now reached her goal as a film producer. Even the movie script she wrote has been successful in the market. Sanja was determined to propose to Imsul, and that moment has been highly anticipated by Imsul all this time. This Korean drama ends with a happy moment between Imsul and Sanja, when they hold a luxurious and romantic wedding party. The end.